friends. I'm Karen, and this is the Family Food for Moms podcast. We're talking about inspiration for family cooking and dining. It's fascinating to think about nutrition and what food was available during the world wars and after them, and what our grandparents and great-grandparents did to feed their families nutritious food during those difficult times. So today we're going to talk about food and nutrition in World War II. There's an interesting article on the National Council on Public History site. One of the posters that it shows says, "There's danger when people tire too easily, when minds are slow to think, when bodies can't fight disease." This was from the Make America Strong series in 1941. Here's another poster. "You can stuff yourself with food and still be committing dietary suicide. Surveys show that millions of Americans are not getting all the vitamins they need." That was from an ad for canned Florida citrus products in 1942. So the science of nutrition is something that we're very familiar with today, but around World War II, it was only beginning. Before the 1930s, scientists knew that we needed protein, we needed energy or carbohydrates, and minerals to have a nutritious diet. They also knew that other things contributed, but they didn't know what they were. And then during the Great Depression, many in the United States suffered from malnutrition and hunger. And a big deficiency was B vitamins, which resulted in people being tired and even depressed. Scientists began to investigate more specifically what minerals and vitamins people needed to stay healthy. They recommended protective foods to prevent malnutrition. So the foods they recommended included milk products, vegetables, eggs, fish, and organ meats. Interesting. Organ meats are highly nutritious, but we're not very good at eating them these days. They've become a lot less familiar to us. But of course, dairy products, especially raw milk, raw dairy, is wonderful. The right kind of vegetables cooked well, fruit, eggs, fish, those are all great. So it's very interesting to me that those things were recommended back then as the best things to eat. And I think that's still true today, but the advice we get is often quite different. So in World War II, the government was very worried about nutrition in the military and among civilians. In fact, a quarter of people called up in the draft through the Selective Service Act were malnourished and apparently unfit to serve. So in 1941, 900 delegates of the National Nutrition Conference for Defense gathered in Washington, D.C. There were doctors, home ec people, dietitians, farmers, food industry professionals, and they wanted to discuss how to improve the nation's health. The slogan was, "Eat nutritional food." Then in 1943, after 2 years of refining their lists, they published the recommended daily dietary allowances. And there were recommendations for intake of calories, intake of protein, calcium, iron, vitamin A, vitamin B1, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin C and D, and even vitamin K, iodine, and copper. To the average person, this wouldn't really be helpful or make much sense. So along with those recommendations, they published what they called the Basic 7. Eat a lunch that packs a punch. Eat the Basic 7 every day. And they had posters about it. So these were the categories. Group 1, green and yellow vegetables. Some raw, some cooked, frozen, or canned. Group 2, oranges, tomatoes, grapefruit, or raw cabbage, or salad greens. Things like sauerkraut would fall into this category. Group 3, potatoes and other vegetables and fruit, raw, dried, cooked, frozen, or canned. Group 4, milk and milk products, fluid, evaporated, dried milk, cheese, etc. Group 5 was meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dried beans, peas, nuts, peanut butter. And then group 6, bread, flour, whole grains. Group 7 was butter. And in their case, they had fortified margarine, which I wouldn't go near. So this was the recommendation for the average person for each day and what they should eat. And I like that it's colors. Sometimes it's helpful to think of getting something from each color of the rainbow with your meals. And then on the poster, they had little cartoons, fight that tired feeling, somebody yawning, 10 strike for energy. There was somebody bowling, builds muscle, and some bodybuilders. Good eyesight pays, and somebody looking at a pretty lady smiling over the fence. Protect yourself from illness. And then for strong bones and teeth. So again, there was the butter and the healthy fats, the green and yellow vegetables, the oranges, tomatoes, and grapefruits, which is the orangey red category, the potatoes and other vegetables and fruits, which is the blue category, milk and milk products, the white category, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, etc. There was the pink category, and then the breads and grains, that was the brown category. So this is really helpful to see how important those things always were. And before a lot of the nonsense in terms of nutrition came in, this is what was recommended. So dairy wasn't the enemy. Dairy was rich and full of nutrients, vitamin C in your fruits. There was no fuss about fruits got too much sugar because it was natural fruit. Soils were better than they are today would have had more minerals, more magnesium in them, and less heavy metals and toxic products in the soil. So they speak about vegetables being important, meat being important. Nobody demonized meat. There wasn't veganism or anything like that. It was all good stuff, and there were no factory farms, so the meat would have been healthy, the animals healthy. And this was a healthy diet. This was nutritious. This was the best way to be strong, have strong teeth and bones, to be able to fight in the army, to not get sick, to be able to have good eyesight, etc. In 1942, a company published a game called Vitamin Go. And they were dedicated in the war effort to help the public to be aware of good nutrition. So instead of making refrigerators, they made wings for warplanes, but then they started this game to help people. So there was a score sheet listing various types of foods. Each food had a point value for 6 vitamins and minerals, and each of those were represented by a different color. So as players ate during the day, they tracked the points value for nutrients on a card of the same color. So this was before anything electronic, so it would all have been done on paper. Winning the game each day meant getting at least 20 points on each of the 6 cards, and then the prize for winning would be better health, and the penalty for losing, greater chance of sickness. You can actually play the game yourself. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And it's so cool because it helps you to be aware of what nutrients you need. We're not worrying about calories. We're worrying about getting the right nutrients in and getting the right minerals in our diet and making sure we get some every day, getting enough of them, what fruits and vegetables, what meats, what dairy to eat in order to gain those points. I think that's a very valuable thing to do. We can do that with our kids, help them to be aware of what they need. We can do that with ourselves when we're making meal plans, just making sure they got enough of those things, enough vitamin C to be able to cope with all the stress of the war, extra vitamin C, without which there's so many problems in the body. And fresh fruit, all those good minerals, the good water within the fruit, so many good things. So around this time was the first time that people really started to understand the scientific basis for what nutrients and vitamins we need in our diet, like A, B, C, D, and E, and then how to intentionally get those from the food we eat. So that was one of the biggest impacts that the Second World War had on food and nutrition, and seeing how people were malnourished and teaching them how to have a nutritious diet and to be healthy in that way. Then there was the shortages in food supply and the rationing, which would have had a huge impact. There was less of every food group available. So people had to learn resourcefulness in with the rationing. Rationing was implemented in many countries, including the UK and the US, to ensure that everyone had access to limited food supplies. So people learned to be resourceful and make meals with fewer ingredients and reduce their waste. They learned to use substitutes and focus on nutrition even with limited resources. Because of wartime shortages and long periods when there was no fresh food available, people learned food preservation. They did canning, drying, and pickling or fermenting their foods. This, of course, helped with nutrients like vitamin C as well. Cabbage fermented is sauerkraut and is high in vitamin C and is shelf stable for many years. Then, of course, there needed to be a priority in ensuring that soldiers were strong and healthy so that they could perform their duties. So, K rations and other portable meals were developed and were energy dense to give the soldiers the energy they needed. They were compact so they could be transported easily, and they had to be balanced in terms of nutrition. So there were advances in the understanding of how to provide the optimal nutrition under these constrained conditions. Countries also launched campaigns to encourage their citizens to grow their own food. These were called victory gardens in the US and the UK. People were encouraged to plant fruit trees and to grow vegetables and to really try and find ways of supplementing their own diets and having fresh produce in their diets. And this was a great help because a lot of these things weren't easily available because all the companies that would have been doing the transport of food or the farming were focused on the war effort. So there was a lot of resourcefulness. By 1944, it was estimated that victory gardens produced about 40% of the US vegetables. So, growing our own food is definitely a helpful way to make sure that there are fewer pesticides on our produce and highest nutrition possible. And then making the most of limited resources is a valuable lesson to learn. Creative meal planning, learning how to stretch limited ingredients, use substitutes, and find ways to make sure your meals are nutritious and filling. Using alternatives like beans, lentils, or other things to bulk up meals while still getting some meat is a creative way to do that. And to focus on nutrition despite the shortages. Focus on eating what fresh fruits, vegetables, and dairy they could find. So that would result in a balanced, nutritious diet. And then being able to share with others in our community and our neighbors, helping our children learn how to eat in a healthy manner and how to prepare food in a way that is possible even in hard times. This is such a fascinating subject to me that I'm going to do a second episode on the practical side of things. So, some practical examples of what people actually cooked, what the shortages were, what they substituted with, and how they ended up making do with what they had. I'll talk about Nutella, a couple of other pies, and interesting things that came from that era. So, thank you for listening today, and I hope it's inspiring to you. It's amazing the resources that we have today, and yet sometimes we find it harder than ever. So it's good to look back at what people did in those times when there was less available. See you next time.